I'm in a strange 6 o'clock lighting thing because of the way the sun comes down over the Hudson. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes, you're going to get this weird ray of light, but it'll pass shortly.
It's your aura. You're just being modest.
James, I'm sorry. What? On this podcast, we start with the intro.
No, we don't. This again? Yep.
Funny?
Hey.
I am in DKIM hell. I am dealing with SPF records. I don't like email. And it's Google's fault. And that's where I'm at. I'm just telling you.
Okay.
We have a guest on the pod. Our friend James O'Brien. I don't know how to describe James. James is a multi-hyphenate. He is a podcaster, a musician, a writer, an artist, a visual artist. He is a kind of a thought leader among certain business types. And he's my longtime dear friend, and I'm so glad you could join us on the pod, James.
I like the last part very much. Thank you very much. And Lionel, so good to meet you. I feel like I know you. I've been listening to your thoughts and your ideas for like a year or more now, and yet here we are for the first time live. And
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I had no idea anybody was actually listening to the podcast, Your Honor.
Well, we knew James was listening because he told us. And now that he's on the podcast, I'm not really sure who is listening. I think we're just.
Well, was he the listener?
Oh yes,
capital T, capital L.
The listener, well, the one we spoke to.
I don't believe any of this. I don't believe any of this. This is all fakery. You have listeners. I'm sure you do, and
I'm sure we do. There's pathetic people all around the globe.
That is demeaning and mean.
I'm sorry, that is mean. Sorry.
And puerile, which is the proper pronunciation.
Don't start. Okay. Don't start with that.
All right. Fine.
Okay.
Fine.
I feel like the word puerile gets used on this podcast, maybe statistically more frequently than any other podcast that exists or has ever existed. But now that you say it, I do, a sense memory comes to me as I've been drifting off of the word puerile.
Yeah. Do you have an example of it in use in the real world, out in the wild?
I think just on your podcast.
That's probably it.
This is the last bastion of puerile, by the way.
Yeah,
which
not
is
how it's pronounced.
Educated folks.
Oh.
Anyway.
Oh. So you're pulling your higher education.
Touché.
Thank you very much.
Monsieur. Okay, enough wordplay. Enough Algonquin roundtable. Let us get back to the business at hand.
We almost entered into Merriam-Webster territory. Pretty close.
There is another podcast that is great called it's Lexicon Valley, and I forget the host's name, but it's great, and he goes into some deep details over the use of various words and the way people speak and the history behind it. It's fantastic.
Cool.
I have a mispronunciation tick. I do notice now and then throughout my life that there have been certain words, and I don't have any examples that I'll bring to bear right at this moment, so don't ask, because I'm not interested in self-flagellation. But I am aware of the fact that occasionally I have in my life said words completely the wrong way, in the right context. Oh, that's an
mizzled
one. No, that's
somebody
that's
thought that
yeah.
Somebody I met thought that MISLED was mizzled, and it really perplexed the living daylights out of her.
Oh, what is it?
Misled.
Oh my gosh, that's a good one.
It sounds like a Christmas word. Mizzled.
And then there's, knave.
You've been mizzled, my friend.
You've been mizzled, buddy.
The cranberries were mizzled on the stuffing.
Well, I feel like I fit right in already, so I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
I was worried that I wouldn't.
Then there's knave. I was so knave at the time.
Knave. Wow.
Yeah. There's a little thing-lot over the I. That means you pronounce them as two separate vowels. Yeah, there's a thing.
But there's almost a Shakespearean bridge between naive and knave. So I think that person may be brilliant, and they just need affirmation.
Oh, I'm the one who's out of step with everything. They're going back to the source. So there's knave, and then there's unique. That's an old Jerry Lewis joke.
Yeah.
You see, good old
See what I
Jerry
have on
Lewis.
cork, Jim? I told you not to have me on.
No, this is just what we needed.
Well, the problem is when you know how to pronounce the word, but you're completely wrong about what it means. I was thinking about this just the other day, which is in one situation, I thought the word nonplussed, because it has the word non, it begins with non, as in not, and not plus. I thought it just meant you didn't care. I was nonplussed. Who cares? It means exactly the opposite.
Right.
One
would have to be plussed to not care.
With very dire results in this case. Fortunately, it took place like 40 years ago, so it has sort of died down a little bit since then. But using the words in exactly the wrong meaning can be dangerous. Okay, that's it. I'm done.
James, I want to talk about your podcast for a moment. So you've been doing a podcast called All Your Days. You started around the time we started, wasn't that right? It was around it wasn't around 2000?
You might have a couple months on me. No, I started putting it out in February, maybe the very end of January 2022.
Yeah, I said 2000. I meant 2020, of course, because I'm in denial about the past 20 years.
I was a post-pandemic baby. So, this was it's been around for going on. It will be almost 2 years at the very start of next year.
And you started out producing, and I want to ask you about this. You started out producing them, sort of a high level of production, story form, with backing sounds, like the opposite of what we do, which is basically like put the mics up, start recording, and what you get is what you get. But you produce these fantastic episodes early on, and a lot of them centered around your life. How did you get where you are? And then also the people that you met along the way. And you talked about all of those things. And then the format switched, or it changed in season 2. And are you in season 3 or 4 now?
We're in season 6 now.
6. Yeah. Okay.
But
I'm a listener. I just don't pay attention to seasons.
No, I mean, I don't really announce it that way, but I keep track of it. I mean, it was an accident. The whole thing was an accident. It was meant to be a way of addressing an album, a record that I had released in January of, maybe it was December of 2021, January of 2022. And I had started by talking to some people that had worked with me on the record. And when I listened to what we were saying, it was just awful. I was like, I don't want to even listen to this. So,
so let's put it on the internet.
Yeah. So we didn't. I mean, that was the thing, is I just scrapped it all. And I said, what I really need to, so like the operative question, Lionel, to that point was like, who cares? Like, who cares what I have ever done in my world? I have to make an argument, some sort of like argument, an essayistic, sort of argument for why anyone would talk about this. So I just started speaking my story into a microphone as a person that's worked in the creative world for a quarter century now, and I had absolutely zilch in the way of expectations. I just thought, well, this will be good to put all this down, and then I can just store it all here. And what happened was that people started to say, I'm listening and I'm interested in this, and there's a kind of vulnerability and a kind of authenticity to it, so keep it going, which was very surprising. And so I did, and then I reached the end of that story, Jim, as you rightly note, and I thought, well, okay, so this either ends right now because I've completed the project, or I have this group of listeners who said to me individually here and there, it's not actually what you're talking about, it's just the way you sort of talk about it. So do you want to just like keep giving us that? And I said, okay, yes, but now I'm done. So it has to be about other people. So we switched the microphone around, and I started to pick people using the thesis of All Your Days. I started to pick people from all my days, and they were people that had been curious to me, artists, musicians, painters, writers, chefs, whatever they might have been. but I knew that they had all been through different kinds of cycles, and I suspect that this is a pretty standard way that people in a creative space operate. They have, I had sort of like an operating thesis, right? So like early days, twists of fate, vanishing acts, resurrections, things that people go through in life in general, but they're particularly focused if you think about it in terms of their creative work. And I just started asking those questions. I literally meant it to be like a 7-question interview where I just asked each one of those stages, tell me one story from each of these stages. The thing is that I got on the line with this guy named Michael Devin at the very beginning of that second phase.
Yeah.
And Michael came with what appeared to be a very thought out and ready to roll life story, which started with him being thrown into a cult at a certain point in his teenage years and having to escape from it. And I spent 3.5 hours interviewing this person and came out of it saying, oh, like there's a whole vein in people that this particular format could help with. And over time, I think that's true. I think it has been more or less helpful to people to place their stories. I think of it as a house, and there are all these rooms, and I'm giving people a room in the house, and then they can put their stories there. And that's what it's been. It's been a very unusual, to me, a very unusual process, something I didn't expect. And it changed once again very recently, just to close the loop, which is that it's very, 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 very time intensive to talk to people that way.
Yeah.
And after a very intense period of 5, 8 episode seasons of doing that, I felt a little toasted. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna take the fall and either not do this at all, or I'm gonna shift it to a sort of short form 20-minute segment where it becomes a little bit more like the first season, a couple of essays about things I care about in the form of 20-minute monologues, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. And then, a couple of short form check-ins with people. How are you doing since we talked? What has changed? Do you have a new album? You have a new thing going on? Let's put that in there. And I'm now booking another like set of what will be 8 or 10 long form interviews with the next batch of people. So a very long-winded answer to your question, but that's great. Of all your days.
Yeah. So are you moving back to the format, the longer format with the 7 questions?
It'll be interspersed, I think. Mm-hmm. I may or may not chunk them off into whole seasons. I may begin to intersperse the long form ones with the short form ones, because I'm really trying to retrain the audience to expect almost anything. In terms of like which format you're going to get during a given week on a Tuesday. And I think that's probably to the benefit of the overall project, which is to say it can be 20 minutes, it can be 2 hours. It is not dependent upon a structure that's been imposed, but upon thematically what the last story and the next story might say to each other. I think that's what it is.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have. No, I'm kidding.
Yep.
So I feel that way too. Absolutely.
Roll the
outro. Sorry. No, I remember one thing you said about all your days when you were doing the big story. Might have been in the first season. You said, I named it All Your Days for one reason, but maybe you want to finish. Do you remember saying this to me?
I mean, it takes up all my days.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really does. It's very difficult to take people's life stories and deal with them in such a way that you are credibly capturing them. And that means that the post-production on these requires writing. It's not just put someone up for 3 hours and have them chat.
Yeah.
It's figure out a way to tell their story within the context of a narrative. And I love that, but it also, it's a full-time job.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Ordinarily it'd be like, Ira Glass, it would be a team of people putting together the clips and making it all make sense. But here we are as podcasters, kind of winging it. And I guess I'm trying to loop myself in with you, but that's not at all what I do. Although, it does take a little while. One of the things I really like is that you have these very complete Substacks for each of the episodes. And so if you listen to the episode, you can also read it's like you read like an article and it listens like a podcast. It's really well done.
It's very new. I'm trying to figure out a way to sort of create different ways to access the story. Some of the newsletters have nothing to do with the podcast. They're reviews of a film or a book that will never show up on the podcast, at least at this point. And other times, it's a roundup on the weekend there's a format of sort of go, give, cook, read, like 4 things that you can do this weekend. Go somewhere, support something that's meaningful to human progress and existence. Cook something that's relatively within the realm of anyone's capabilities, and read something, which is usually an article, from like The Atlantic or a thread on Twitter or something that I think that really captures the zeitgeist of the week for me anyways. And that has nothing to do with the podcast. But then on Tuesdays, there's a sort of article format where maybe like this week, you're listening to Hamill on Trial speak in a short interview on the podcast. The interview doesn't show up in the newsletter, but the video for the new song that Hamill's releasing does. And so you're getting a little bit of a yin and a yang kind of relationship between the two. I don't know why I've done this, because what I've said before is that it was very hard to make the podcast in and of itself. So I've tripled the output by making a podcast and 3 newsletters. But that tends to be the way that I operate.
Yeah.
When things get hard, make it harder.
Yeah, this is what I do because of my brother, Johnny Gotta-Do, who's always like, you know what you got to do? And then I have to do it. But you seem to be able to do that all by yourself. So it's, on top of which, you are making music, producing your own music, writing songs, doing artwork, making videos.
It's true. I mean, look, I don't know what else to do. Do you?
No, I don't.
You can go into insurance.
That's true.
I hear you make a lot of money. I mean,
I just need something to do with the money, Lionel. You know what I mean? So I will fully
spend
confess,
it on stuff.
I'm a full-time advertising person in New York. I mean, I work with marketers and advertisers Monday through Friday on top of doing all these other things. And that is the resource. That's the money that allows me to say yes to any project.
Oh, I was just joking. I mean,
but
so you are.
I'm not some like trust fund kid. Like I absolutely am a day-to-day, weekly earner. It's just that you find efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
As you have, Jim, I'm sure, working with your clients, and Lionel, I'm sure you do, working within your structure at the university. Like, you find efficiencies to like create space in your life to pursue passions with keyboards or synthesizers, or make your own music, Jim, or go to Iceland and do your things. Like, these are pathways that open up if you actually like lay the groundwork for a sustainable life. I don't know how you do it with children, Jim. I completely, absolutely am stunned at the level of output that you've maintained, given the time constraints that can come with, a two-child family. I personally don't have that particular factor in play. So I'm stunned when people are still highly productive and creative with that as part of their lives.
I was not productive and creative, except in my writing during the first 10 years of my eldest daughter's life. But it gets a little easier when they get past 10. They really have their own interests, and there's a little more space.
It gets a little easier when they hit 22.
Yeah, probably.
They get their driver's license.
Yeah, and then they're gone, and all the time in the world. Of course, you've lost your mind at that point, drooling in the corner. I was thinking, that I'd like to pursue a second career. It just came to me the other day when I had to go to the printers and pick up some material for the album release, and I'm biking back with this Bike Messengers pack on my back, full of like something I picked up at the printer. I said, I want to be a geriatric bike messenger. Is that a career choice? Can I do that?
I mean, it's weird. It's a challenge.
Being geriatric and a bike messenger, or being a bike messenger for delivering things to older.
Just an elderly bike messenger that you're like, oh, here comes Jim. I wonder if he's going to make it.
He'll get there. Just hang on.
There's going to be a lot of them, dude. There's going to be a lot of old people.
Line, Jim. I'll get there.
Yeah. It's going to I mean, there's going to be a lot of old people already, and they're only getting more of them as every day goes by. So
it's true.
Yeah.
But, yep, I just said it again. James, you're able to avoid that. It's surprising.
What?
How did you train yourself not to do the but I've just been hearing it in my voice all the time. But
it's endemic to most conversations. I mean, people use these as they don't use them at all. I mean, it just happens in their voice. The most intelligent people I speak to, many of them are butt-ummers. The
butt-ummers.
That's the thing. The butt-ummers are out there, but I don't even hear it, to tell you the truth. I don't hear it at all.
We usually filter it out. There was a long time ago when Arianna Huffington was writing against Arnold Schwarzenegger and the governor, the governor of California at the time. For governor of California, there was a debate between the three of them, and someone noticed that Schwarzenegger, his ums were like machine gun bullets. They're like, and they sampled it, right? I think it might have been an NPR story. And then Arianna Huffington had silence, no ums, no you knows, nothing. She just spoke in complete written sentences. And I find that just kind of amazing.
He's having a tremendous, I don't know if it's a fourth act now, but what he's doing right now is just, I find, really inspiring, incredible. The story of Schwarzenegger's late in life resurgence as a no bullshit, take care of yourself advocate with extreme vulnerability, sort of radical vulnerability as the way that he's telling the story. Has been highly interesting to me this year in particular. He started this project called the Pump Club, and the Pump Club is a exercise app at its core and a newsletter at its core. But its thesis, and he's working with two other people, its thesis is, let's just cut through all of the bullshit and all of the marketing and all of the garbage that gets foisted upon people that are trying to take care of their bodies and their minds later in their lives. And let's just get down to brass tacks here. Like, what is it that you need to do to increase your longevity, game for a longer life, but also be healthier and more satisfied while doing it. And he's been a very powerful voice in this for the past, especially 10 months or so. If you haven't checked it out, I suggest to start with his X/Twitter page, but then check out his Pump Club website. Like it's not meathead stuff. It's really nice, balanced, important information for people that says, they're going to try to sell you supplements and diets and exercise programs. What you really need is a mindful approach to your own near-term health and then long-term healthiness, and I think he's really achieved something there. I'm a huge proponent of it. I've mentioned it on my newsletter. I think maybe the first podcast I did in the new format, I mentioned it. I think it's one of the most remarkable transformations of a persona, yet again, by somebody who just seems to be brilliant at doing this over and over again.
It's true. I mean, he has reinvented himself a number of times. I remember when he was running for governor, I found that laughable.
Yep.
And then the more I
not
heard
anymore.
He's not at all laughable.
Man, not no. Intervening 20 years.
Yeah.
I'd long for those days, but I remember when he announced, I was like, okay, this is like a stunt, right? This is like a joke from MGM Studios or something like this is an Onion story.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And in retrospect, he wasn't. I don't remember reading any articles about him being a disaster as a governor of California.
No,
quite the opposite. Not quite the opposite, but again. By the way, since we're talking about Onion articles, I just have to remind you guys that I reread one yesterday. It just made me laugh out loud, which was when George W. Bush was elected.
Yeah.
The article, The Onion ran a headline, which is Americans, your 8-year nightmare of peace and prosperity is at an end. It was so prescient. You got to reread. You've got to reread that one. It's amazing. Yeah. And where he says, I'm going to get us engaged in some pointless war in Iraq or somewhere like that.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely chilling, but I love that headline. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, no, Schwarzenegger. I remember when it came out, I was laughing. I was like, this is ridiculous. But in retrospect, no.
Yeah. Well, his YouTube videos have been, whatever his social media posts have been really on point and really on target. And I know he has a book coming out. Might be one we would read.
Called "Be Useful," and I haven't read it yet, but I do have it queued up. But that's been his thesis for the run that he's on now, which is that his tagline is "How can I be useful?" And he's kind of taken social media under his, under this approach where he's directly interacting with people, and very plainly so, in a way that many people of his career would never do, where it's clear that it's him. And it's clear when it's not him, but it's clear when it's him directly interacting with people and saying, you have survived this, you're doing this, you're changing your life, and I'm proud of you. And I know that sounds a little bit Gwyneth Paltrow, a little bit goopy, but the way that he's doing it to me seems to be important on a number of levels that I'm still thinking about and processing.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because then you were also talking before about themes of your podcasts about resurrection and redemption. I'm fascinated by stories of people who gave up. And then at the very last moment. And so my favorite ones are, and one just came out recently, and since we're on the topic of California politics, Dianne Feinstein. She had made the determination. The afternoon had come, if I remember correctly, the afternoon had come when she was going to announce that she was exiting politics forever. And that afternoon, Harvey Milk was shot.
Wow.
And Moscone was shot. And people came running down the hallway and said, Dianne, can you fill in?
Yeah.
Can you handle this? Because it's a nightmare. And she said, okay. And she showed up and she gave a talk that afternoon. Amazing. George R.R. Martin. Yeah, George R.R. Martin was a science fiction writer and was going to give it up. And he said, I'm going to write one last thing called Game of Thrones and see. And then I'm out. The other one I love is Paolo Bacigalupi.
Really?
Oh yeah,
he has one of those too. No, I don't know his life story.
Oh, you got to watch the video where he talks about that. But go ahead,
James. Have you read any Paolo Bacigalupi?
No.
Right up your alley. Oh my God. So first you have to read, there's a short story called Pump 6. We started this entire podcast. I think we called the first episode Pump 6. It's so good. It is a story for our times, unfortunately. But tell me, what was Paolo's resurrection story?
Well, he has a YouTube video. You can watch it where he talks about it, where he said, I wrote a novel and my publisher said no. Nobody wants to buy it. I wrote a second novel. The publisher said, I'm not going to even show this to anybody. I wrote a third novel and my agent said, don't send me any more novels.
Wow.
And he said, at this point, I figured I have a family, I have a wife, and I have some kids. So this is it. So he wrote a short story. He'd been writing novels up to that point. He wrote a short story and it won every award in the world.
Right.
And then, and of course, my favorite one, which I mentioned before, my favorite, Loser, because it's about losers, people who've lost, is Ulysses Grant, who was a stunning loser. I mean, a catastrophic. I mean, you could read. He wrote it himself. He wrote what's considered one of the greatest books of American literature, which is his autobiography, he had enormous help from Mark Twain. It's a great book. It's a great book. And he doesn't go into this, but if you read a biography of Ulysses Grant, he at the beginning of the Civil War, he was a complete and utter failure. And he had problems with alcohol. He had been out of work multiple times, had to beg friends for money, had to beg for a job from his wife's parents, who were slave owners who he hated. I may be mangling this quite a bit, but I love you. I mean, I don't love you. I love this story. I think redemption stories are some of the most powerful stories in the world, because we all feel that in our heart. We all believe that we have not lived up to our promise. And I shouldn't say we all, I do. I think a lot of us walk around with that secret hope that, the day's going to come when I'm going to get the call. The day's going to come when something's going to happen and people will get to know what I can truly do. It's kind of a childish thing, but every now and then it happens to me.
Right. And it's a great story.
Yeah! It's like you won the lottery. Congratulations.
Yeah, some people win.
Some people win. Yeah, it's sad that, Dianne Feinstein's career had to be resurrected through a disaster and a tragedy.
Yeah. I mean, I have a hard time separating her significance from that Harvey Milk moment. I think that it's indicative of our consciousness of people over time, that for many, Dianne was encapsulated by the last several years of her life, and not the first 25 or 30 of them.
Or 120.
I think it's straight up ageism. I think it's what we do to people that inhabit a body that represents something to our eyes that doesn't necessarily communicate the history of that person, which is a mind within that body doing things over time that have made a difference. And I think that while it was frustrating for sure that Dianne Feinstein created complications within a structure, are the complications she created more problematic than the ones that we've just seen happen in the House of Representatives now, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. Yeah.
May you live in interesting times.
No, may you not. We live in very interesting times. I'd take a little less interesting right about now. Anyway, but so that's an interesting theme. Is that sort of like the Arnold theme?
It's interesting. He's so tied up with
his physical instantiation. Let's talk like computer programmers. He's so tied up. I mean, he's so tied up with his physique. Is he anymore? I mean, you're the one who seems to have been paying more attention to this than I have.
He's a person in the last third of his physical life, and he doesn't look like a bodybuilder, so to speak, at this point, but he's doing fine. His body is breaking down in the way that people's bodies break down, and he's revealing that in ways that are instructive and helpful, I think, to people that are maybe even not as old as he happens to be at this point, but that have problematic bodies and that are trying to be healthy within the shapes that they were given, within the diagnoses they may have been delivered. And to his way of writing about this right now, for people, it's about not having 0% weeks. So you might be challenged in a number of ways to be healthy and fit and eat well and drink well and exercise well. And you may have ups and downs within the course of a given year based on those circumstances. But the goal here is not perfection. It's not to have 0% weeks.
0%
So as you've done 0% of what is good for yourself during the course of the week. Okay. So you don't have 0% weeks. And I think that that's a very helpful starting point for most people.
W-E-A-K-S.
Weeks.
As in weeks, opposite of strong.
Time frame. No.
Oh, weeks as in time frame. Okay.
Time frames, yeah. So don't have a 0% week.
I am 0 week. I am 0% week.
Have a week where you did 20% of what you meant to do, but not 0%.
You do something. Right.
Yeah. No, I relate to that. I'm definitely feeling that. And I don't know why I never had this, philosophy most of my life, but everything's better if I'm like doing something like swimming, running, or yoga or biking. And, just doing some of that every day it just makes everything better. And I sound like an idiot. But
no, Not at all.
It resonates. It resonates.
Not sounding like an idiot at all. I think we're often plagued by what I refer to as sort of the child mind. And the child mind wants pure pleasure and access to all things that are wanted, not necessarily that are needed. And I think that the creative mind in particular is subject to the child mind, that the seduction of the creative process, the seduction of the iterative process is powerful and often replaces getting up from your workspace and going down to the bike or the gym or the pool. And you can justify it even more specifically because it's productive to some extent, like you're making something. So I gave my day to making this thing. I didn't go to the gym, or I didn't jog, or I didn't do the things that would be helpful to sustain this body, this vessel over time.
Right.
And I think that's probably a pretty common story. But I think that other things do it too. I think that parenthood can do it to people for sure, based on what I've observed. And I think that even your job, whether it's creative as you think of creative or not, just like being passionate about your job can replace your deliberative mind with the child mind that says, I can't do this. I have to go with what's available right now and just like follow this. And if you think about the way that I was as a child, and maybe the way you've observed your children to be, like they follow the thread that's right in front of them. Like they stick with like whatever's giving them that like pleasure response,
dopamine. Hit. Yeah. Well, it resonates. I mean, I think there's something about what was in that movie Barton Fink, The Life of the Mind. I'll tell you about The Life of the Mind. That when you're always in your head, it's easy to ignore the body. It's easy to think of the body as separate. And I'm living in my world of ideas, and that gives me pleasure, and that's what I'm focusing on. And I am being productive because I'm churning out these ideas and I'm making them into things. But the body and the mind are not really so separate. And
I think that for many of us, the quarantine, if people experienced it as I did, which was a true quarantine, without intrusions, probably set us back. I mean, I was at a certain place in physical fitness before the quarantines that was pretty remarkable in terms of my weight, my body mass index, so on and so forth. The first time in my life I had been in such good shape since probably I was 20, 25. And the quarantines definitely produced the perfect environment for ignoring the process that got me to that place. Like the sort of discipline and the rigorous mental, application of task over time over task. I'm not sure which. I think the quarantines sort of created that space for many of us who were doing pretty okay or fine to enter a space where we were set back by 5 or 10 years in terms of whatever we had built up. I had been working on my regimen since 2016 or 17, and in 2020 I weighed 147 pounds and it was pretty much all muscle.
Nice.
And by the time I got to 2022 I was back up to 170 pounds and it wasn't mostly muscle. That was a direct function of letting go, which is on me. It's not really on the pandemic or the quarantines, but it was a perfect space for the child mind to say, I win. It's me. Yeah. I'm back.
Right.
Thought I went away, but here I am.
Yeah.
Having a lollipop.
Ben and Jerry's. It made me the man that I am. That's a Bob Loyism, but yeah.
It's unfortunate. All of the pleasure response stuff is actually very fucking wonderful. It's just terrible for you after the age of 35. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the excess of it that tends to get us. Well, I've also kind of gone through a weight loss thing, and it's really not about avoiding. Thank you. It's not about avoiding. I wrote a Substack about dealing with a scale, and I know I told you this story, but yeah, the way I deal with the scale is I translate it into a year, and then I look up the year. That way I don't feel like crap every day. So I'm in the Napoleonic era, and I was pre-revolutionary. So, I'm still hovering above even you at your heaviest. But I forget where I was going with this. I had a really great time.
It's a fairly meditative approach. I mean, by creating a story around a quantitative instance, it's kind of like what people do when they like turn a tarot card over in the morning or something like that. Like something that's like clearly not related to science in any particular way, and it's not related to anything that's quantifiable. But you're taking
what's this about? People turn over a tarot card? This is the first time I've ever heard of this. What's this?
Yeah, sure. There's different mechanisms people use to sort of isolate their spot during the day into a place that allows them to, frame bad information or worrisome thoughts. So in Jim's case, it's standing on the scale and looking at a number that suggests progress or regress, right? Like, so those are the two options, right. Or like stasis. So those are the three ways that the way that the scale works. And you're saying, well, instead of it just being a piece of information, it's going to be a prompt. I'm going to use it to think about other things. I'm going to use thinking about those other things as a motivation to change the number. And even if the number goes in the direction I don't want it to, I still get a reward, which is a very like in the moment kind of like explore the feeling kind of thing, which I think that some meditation practices emphasize. Like it's about inhabiting the discomfort and understanding the parameters and the size and shape of it. And I think that other people do different things. They might, I've been doing some reading about these things recently, and some people might they might have a deck of tarot cards on their bureau, and they might turn over the top card and look at the information that card suggests, all the metaphorical storytelling it's trying to communicate, and use that to think about their day or think about their week.
Have you tried it?
About their place in life. Oh, sure. And especially, going through life, I've always dabbled in different kinds of storytelling tools. And,
do you keep the tarot card deck by your bed? And have you tried?
Yeah,
it sounds really fascinating to me. I got to try that.
I do have one there. I don't view it as in any way, shape, or form anything to do with like what people refer to as magic or the occult. But the story of the deck, the tarot deck, is not that old. First of all, we're talking about the 1600s, the early 1700s, maybe back to the 1400s in some respects. But it's essentially a storybook that has had different authors, and people use it in different ways. But in general, each of the arcana within the deck, the minor arcana, the major arcana, the different kinds of cards, they all kind of fit together in a sort of tree of life sort of progress. Sort of these are the characters on the pictures that do things across the course of the cards that they inhabit, and as a way of framing human moments, it's really no different than reading a novel or a poem, where you inhabit a fictional space for X amount of time, and then maybe that prompts you to think about your reality for X amount of time. And I meditate as well. It's not transcendental meditation. It's more of a mindfulness practice around sensory check-ins, focus forward and backward, outward and inward on sounds or on sights. It's not, I think, Jim, the way that you meditate.
No, that sounds actually pretty close. Okay. It's not that different because if I can just, I'm sorry, I want to butt in just because somebody says meditation, I'm like, I just want to talk and talk.
Court.
Because my mind just starts going and I can't stop it. The practice that I do is meditation on the body. The practice that I teach is meditation on the body. The body includes all the sense perceptions. So the body includes sight, sound, smell, touch, etc. And also the sixth, which is the mind, the thoughts. And those are perfectly good objects of meditation. There's that's certainly part of mindfulness as far as the school that I was brought up in. And I did want to mention we had some meditators on the podcast in a different episode earlier, and one of them, Catherine Pilfrey, has published on Shambhala Publications the I Ching Oracle, which is a 64-card illustrated deck of the I Ching. Yeah. So if you want to try something other than the tarot, that was sort of her intention as well.
I think that there are all kinds of mechanisms. I mean, you could also do this with like Joyce's Ulysses. You could just open a page of Ulysses and read it and use it as a way to make notes about what you're thinking that day.
Oh, yeah.
Like anything that's a fairly metaphorical or abstract approach to a start or a moment during your day, I think is helpful in putting what's critical to you maybe in a kind of frame for 5 or 10 or 15 or 30 minutes, whether that's meditation or turning over a tarot card or opening a page of a tome, whatever it is that you're doing. I think that these things, for me anyways, are ways to intentionally approach what happened yesterday, what I'm doing today, and what I think might happen tomorrow.
What can you say more about your meditation, or is it sort of just personal, private?
I view it as not very personal or private. I was inspired by my wife, Kara, who has been meditating for some time, and I would occasionally, especially during the quarantines, come out into the common space in our apartment and startle myself because she'd be meditating. I'd be like 6:30 in the morning.
Hey, what are you doing?
7:00 in the morning. You kind of, you're like, I just crept off to the.
Are you meditating? Am I interrupting you? Are you meditating again?
Slunk back,
Do you mind if I grind some coffee?
I'd go hide, and then I was like, well, I love the intentionality of this, and I'm inspired by the way that this person is sort of exuding this deep focus. The fact that I felt uncomfortable by encountering it made me interested in it. I was like, what is going on with that?
Boy, that is such the essence of mindfulness. So I love that you just said that, because you encountered it, it made you uncomfortable, and that became a motivation. I was saying this to the people who come to Mindful Aware, the meditation I do twice a week, and I just said, when there's an antidote to a lot of the things that annoy you, boredom, the antidote to boredom is curiosity. Start to wonder, why are you bored? The antidote to being offended is, what is it about this that is threatening my ego? And get curious. And that's just fantastic that you could see that and not just be like, that's not for me, I'm not doing any of that bullshit. You're like, I'm uncomfortable by this. That's interesting.
Oh, it was an interesting doorway. I mean, it was effective, not an interesting doorway. It was an effective doorway. And so I did my research and found some resources in the meditation space that allowed me to approach it from the perspective of neuroplasticity and sort of more scientific, if not scientific, angles. And then began my practice, I'd say, in about February or March of this year. And I'm pretty good. I mean, I stick to it mostly. I'm about a 10 to 15 minutes a day person, and I try to do it outside. There's a community garden around the corner from us, so I'll finish up. So Arnold's thing taught me to take 3 10-minute walks a day minimum on top of whatever I might do in the gym, because you're getting in a mile and a half of walking by just taking 3 10-minute walks. And on one of my 10-minute walks, I'll stop in the community garden and add 10 minutes of meditation. And that's been really interesting to me. And from there, it sort of unlocked my older associations and interactions with things like a tarot deck, where I was like, well, it's the same thing. It's the same exact idea. It's about setting an intention and then using a piece of information to create a series of mindful moments throughout the day. Oh, this reminds me of what that card has to do with. Oh, this reminds me of what that card has to do with. And the same thing with meditation. If you're working on sound or a sight or a smell kind of weak, then you try to find places throughout the day to stop, maybe before you have a meeting with somebody or while you're cooking. There's a nice way to do it too.
Yeah.
And just, enact a few minutes of that particular practice. So I've been open to that in maybe a way that I wasn't in a sort of structured way ever before. And I'd give all the credit to the fact that I walked in on this person that I care deeply about doing this. And it made me feel like, what are they got that I don't have? What are they doing? Yeah.
What do they got that I ain't got? Courage.
Yeah.
Courage.
Oh well, yeah, courage, because it's vulnerable to put yourself out as a meditator in a public space.
Yes, it's powerful. It's powerful to meditate in public. Actually, sort of a deep practice. It's considered a deep practice in the Buddhist lineage. To
I
go
feel
out
the
and
eyes
do
of
that.
the Upper West Siders upon me at the West Side Community Garden when I sit on a bench. I don't cross my legs. I'm not holding my hands up.
No need.
But I just sit on the bench and put my palms on my knees and engage, and I can feel the attention shift from other sitters in the garden.
This is how Eckhart Tolle started. He started outside in Central Park. He was sitting.
Is he the guy who says the pain body comes up?
I don't know. Oh, it might be the pain body, right? He just
the pain body comes up.
He wrote the book "The Power of Now," which was sort of a cult, classic. Yes, the pain body. Right. I read a little bit. I read a little bit of it. It's good. Certainly good. But yeah, great practice to meditate in public.
Well, it's the one I got, so it's been doing what it does for me, and nice. I'm interested in it because it's very fresh and very new in my short biography.
I have a different theory about the tarot.
Okay,
all right.
Not different.
I have no theory. No.
Well, you said it's a framing device, which is true because you wake up, you look at the card. You think about the interpretation of the card or an interpretation of the card. You say, okay, I should be on watch for this in my day. Maybe they're the same theories. The thing I love about the card, which is the reason why Brian Eno came up with Oblique Strategies, which is basically a tarot deck. And the I Ching also is the exact thing, is that it kicks you out of the rut. You pull a card and it's a bolt out of the blue. And you say, oh, maybe that's what my situation is, because the human mind is fabulous at saying, oh, the situation I'm going through is not that, it's this. We can reframe what's happening to us in a million different ways. And the great, that's why I think it does, is it jostles things. It kicks things up and it resets the counters, and you're free to go, oh, it's not X, maybe it's X, but it might also be Y. Oh. And so your brain gets released, because the problem with the brain is that we get in this rut. We decide it's this situation. And,
right.
And it's not, maybe it is. Who knows what it is? I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But the great thing I love about the tarot and about the I Ching and all that stuff is that, oh, maybe that's if I think about it this way, and sometimes you're just trying to find a way to get out of a bad mind thought. You're in a headspace that is not going anywhere, which is, I don't know about you guys, is about 98% of my daily existence. And so you're looking for anything. That's why we spend a lot of time like flicking through different pages and stuff like that, is to distract ourselves. I do.
Right.
But the nice thing about like an I Ching or a tarot card is like, oh, yes, I know what you're talking about. This is why newspaper horoscopes are such a persistent art form. Everybody knows they're total nonsense, but people love them because it's like, oh yeah, maybe I should rethink this thing, and it gives you license, it gives you permission to rethink what is going on around you and allow your brain to rewrap itself. That's a very sort of a pretty flowery way of putting it. But I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated about the things you do to change your perspective, the things you do to get yourself out of ruts. Anyway, that's my little.
No, I hear all of that, and I think that there are, even like Jim, you can speak to this as well. There are people that we know and things that you yourself have done that are about creating random instances of selection and then speaking to the things that those selections make us think about in relation to the near and immediate term experiences that we're having, right? So whether that's, somebody's radio 8-ball or another person's ego in the oracle, these are constructs that we are attracted to because I think that we're generally, and some other people go to therapy. And other people do all of these things. Like, we're attracted to constructs that allow us, as Lionel, you say, to escape the immediate confines of
kick us out of orbit,
frustration and the feeling of stasis, and to say, it's me. Like, I'm here. I'm thinking. I just needed this moment to sort of remind me of what that sounds like when I'm thinking.
Well, I love that you brought up oblique strategies, Lionel, because that's precisely, I feel like, what Eno is after. There's a Pema Chodron quote. She says, "When I'm meditating, whatever arises, pure delight. The moment is fresh." And that is something we lose when we, let's say, go in the studio with our band and we start doing our regular things with the band, because that's what the band does, because that's the story we all have, probably the whole band has in their head, slightly different, right? Bono's an asshole or whatever it is, but there's a story going on and it's unraveling, and Eno is presenting this card and saying, drop the story, be right here and see what happens. And the truth is, anything can be your tarot card. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're looking at. You have to actually just drop the story and see it for it to push you away from your chosen narrative and take you into the moment. We've really gone totally bonkers here.
No, this is wonderful.
Other people I've talked to recently have brought up hypnosis as something that they're experimenting with, and how powerful that's been for them. And I think, again, it's a construct, like a construct into which you enter willingly and you allow somebody to prompt or provoke and then attempt to incorporate after the experience, whether that's something you feel like someone made you do or that you did yourself. I don't think it's really important. I think it's that you made the intent of saying, I'm releasing control, to Lionel's point. I'm releasing control for a moment or a half hour. And on the other side of that release, I'm going to move forward. There's a guy named Eric Davis who refers to himself as a psychonaut, and he works with psychedelics, and I watch him occasionally here and there on different lectures and such. I'm not a person that partakes in these things at this point in my life, but same thing, which is, by creating a less controlled but parameter bounded experience, life on the internal side moves forward a couple notches, one hopes. And I think that that's what most people are, in some way, shape, or form, if they're at all conscious of themselves and not just locked into the routine imposed upon them. I think most people are attempting to create those structured moments of release and then trying to use them as ways to improve.
Well, I want to try and land this awesome plane. I'm not sure how, but I do want to touch a little bit on some of the documentary work you've done and also on your songwriting. And so I feel like there's not enough time to actually go into all of it. I watched recently the video that you created, the documentary about Betsy Siggins and that piece of paper that Dylan left in her typewriter. And it's fantastic. You can get it from, is it JamesO'BrienHQ.com? JamesO'BrienHQ.com. And it is listed there under your documentary films. It's really fantastic. There's this, Dylan, you can probably tell the story if you want, or I can summarize it, James. But it stuck with me. It's a it's a strange piece. It's odd. People attribute various levels of meaning to what was left in her typewriter, but I mean, Bob Dylan was playing at open mics and he needed a place to stay, and he started typing at 4 a.m. and he left it there.
Yeah, all that's true. That documentary to me is a love story. It's about this person who was deeply in love with both Bob Dylan and Joan Baez.
Yeah.
And who is looking back through time at a moment that still feels very powerful to them. And this piece of paper is the bridge between the two temporal experiences, the now of 2011 when that was made, and the then of 1963 or 64 when that piece of paper was left in the typewriter.
Yeah, I love that you
relate to more and more as I get older. I can relate to more and more the idea that like certain objects and certain memories become bigger and bigger and bigger as opposed to smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Nobody would believe me if I didn't have this.
when you go back to the apartment and Betsy is looking at the spot where the typewriter used to be. That's fantastic. It was really.
I can't even describe sometimes the universe is very compliant, and the fact that we were able to locate that house, and the way that we got into that apartment was that I hand wrote a note and slipped it under the door. And the person who lived there happened to be a pair of poets.
Oh. Wow.
And they were very fascinated by the fact that they lived in this spot that had these people inhabited it in 50 years prior, 40 years prior. So I couldn't have been luckier. It could have just been some people who were just like working. What the hell is this about? Right. You know what I mean? Like these were these sensitive poets who were like, wait, you're telling me that Bob Dylan came and wrote things in my apartment? Let me please allow you in to film in my apartment. That would be wonderful. And there's just times when things just line up, they just line up and you just try to stay out of their way.
It's a great film. It's a short film. Check it out. James O'Brien HQ. I'll put a link.
There's so much more to tell of that person's story, too, of Betsy Siggins' story. It's been told in several ways and several times. I happen to be in possession of a really, really complete oral history of that person's life through a number of major moments in mid-20th century cultural and political and humanitarian history. And one of the things that I'd very much like to do, it just requires some permissions, is to put it together in the form of a multi-episode podcast. Probably for All Your Days, it's perfect for it.
Yeah.
And capture it all in one place with the kind of narrative structure that All Your Days brings to these things. I've been meaning to reach out and try to get the permission. I mean, people that I work with, these people are very much older people now. It's not 2011. It's, it's 22 years later and life has taken its course, but I'd like to get the permissions before,
Yeah. Fair. And anybody who hasn't subscribed to All Your Days, it's on all the different podcasting. I think it's certainly on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts.
I think it's everywhere. Although Google Podcasts is going away.
Oh, is it? Oh,
no. Well. They're closing it down. It won't make a huge difference to people like you and Mitchum, I'm sure, but it is going away in the near future.
Well, Stitcher and
they want everything to be on YouTube.
Oh, really? So they want the podcast to be on.
Yeah, everything to be on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay.
I have no strong feelings about this either way. I'm just noting it as a technology geek moment.
Yeah. All right,
a podcasting geek moment.
Well, definitely subscribe and check it out. James O'Brien has also released a number of great albums. And you're working. You sent me a new song. I am so privileged. You text me songs. It's fantastic.
Cursed, you mean. Cursed.
I love it.
Cursed.
You're
Cursed
love
is
it.
the word you meant to say.
When is this guy going to stop?
Cursed.
Another frickin' song.
No, I finally figured out how to play them so that they don't stop midway through because, as soon as the screen goes dark, they stop playing. But I think I can copy. I copy them to something. I will play us out with one.
Is that
that's
okay?
all right with if that's all right
James?
with you, James.
We can chat about it if there's one that you'd like to pick.
Is there one that you'd like me to?
They're pretty raw and vulnerable right now. I'm really sending you bedroom demos.
No, I'm sorry. Something you've released. I wouldn't do that.
Oh yeah, something released is fine. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's. I always think it's over. I always think it's over.
What?
Yeah, when I complete a collection of songs, I'm like, thank goodness this is the last one. Because for me, Lionel, I've said this, I think, here and there throughout life, and you probably haven't heard this, so I'll say it here. It's like there's a radio in my head, and it can be months, even years. There have been times when it's been a decade where the radio doesn't click on. But when it's capable and active, it's very distracting and impossible to not deal with. So, and it's become particularly acute over the last 5 years or so.
Really?
Where, whole songs, I have awakened from a dream with a whole song in my head, and at 4:00 in the morning, sat across the room from where I'm sitting now and been able to just write out the whole song with the melody in my head, no instrument, and save it in the wet drive until the time is right, like the sun is up and people are no longer sleeping, to take care of the business of setting it down. And it's just been that way sort of off and on nonstop since 2017 in particular. Great. And yeah, so you say, but it's also
good songs?
I think they're okay. I mean, they tend to arrive in the form that they're meant to be.
Who are we to question?
I'm not. So I set them down.
Yeah.
I set them down. And I've said this to you, Jim, and I've said this to other artists that I've talked to. It is like creating a little secret world. A secret world that I get to inhabit for a couple of months while I'm putting these things together and recording them. And that they exist, I do feel like it's life's work. It's part of life's work, whatever these are. That's what I'm meant to be putting down. And I absolutely don't have any structured aspirations around these things. I'm not out there like trying to get gigs. A couple have come along over the past couple of years, and if they're good stories, like the room matters, the timing of it matters, the person asking is important to some chapter of my life, I'll say yes and do an opening gig or something like that. But I'm absolutely not in the game of trying to be a working musician or draw people to shows. I'm just not. There's so many other things I have to do than that. And it's been an interesting half decade, 6 years now, of just following the muse and not attaching the muse to any kind of marketing or specific outcomes. It's been pure. And
it's refreshing.
Well, you speak helpful. Of that. Just one thing I saw, because I live a hermit's life, but I did watch something recently, which was Wes Anderson's story of Henry Sugar, which was recently released. It's only 40 minutes long. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
And Wes Anderson sort of overstays his welcome a little bit with me. I love some of his films. I love The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. I think that is one of my absolute feel-good films of all time. It's right up there with like The Fifth Element and Indiana Jones and all that stuff. The Life Aquatic, Steve. But there's other times where Wes Anderson really gets up my nose. But this one's interesting. This one's interesting because he talks about Roald Dahl.
You get up my nose, sir.
Yeah, he really does. He really does.
He's insufferable at this point.
He what?
He's insufferable at this point. Like the last several excursions, Atomic City and so on, I feel as if I'm being spoon-fed just tablespoon after tablespoon of sugar.
Yeah, I don't dig it. I didn't really like Fabulous Mr. Fox. I liked like the first half of it. And then after a while, I'm just like, oh, this is getting really tedious. But regardless, look, the guy's far more accomplished than I am. I loved Hotel Budapest, but that's a lot because of Ralph Fiennes' performance, the performance of the actors within that movie. But anyway, he comes with this 40-minute thing, which is the life of Henry Sugar. And what's interesting about it is that not the director and not the film, but the life of Roald Dahl. He's a very interesting guy. He's a very interesting guy. One, he was an RAF pilot. Two, I think he's Danish. He was an RAF pilot. Three, he was really not he was just like us. You know, he wasn't a really nice, not a really cuddly person. He had this whole thing where he had like his shed where he would write his stories. And there's all kinds of, you can read all kinds of things about how his children, he had lots of children. They're like, yeah, Dad never talked to us. You know, Dad didn't really want, but not that they disliked him, but the interesting thing that you mentioned is, the whole thing of the muse speaking to you. And having to do this stuff and creating these things without any ulterior motive, just doing it and transcribing the muse. And Roald Dahl was sort of that way. He wrote fiercely bizarre books.
Bizarre books.
He did. I mean, they're fabulous. But they're complete. I mean, if it wasn't for Roald Dahl, I doubt that a lot of other people would exist because he really came up with books. They weren't Beatrix Potter. Okay, let's put it that way.
Right.
You know, he's talking about children being threatened by other human beings.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the big theme, and
but
also
children trust that, like that kind of. And adults trust that too. Like there is a universal understanding of that dynamic in those kinds of stories. And I think that especially in the 1960s and 1970s, but probably for decades beforehand too, there was permission within authors' remit to say, and within their remit to say, like, things threaten you, don't they? Like, things come to get you. Things live in a liminal space between good and bad, and you're aware of that, aren't you? And I think that Roald Dahl is one of the people that could do that. I think that Lewis Carroll could do that as well, and others. But in particular, I think you're spot on that, like, the threat that's inherent in some of the stories that come from really post World War I and post World War II authors who were ostensibly writing for maybe younger people, were very much telling the truth to children in a way that was important, significant. And I'm not sure that I can't speak knowledgeably about it, but I'm not certain that J.K. Rowling's done the same thing in her books that are nominally for children. I think that
the interesting thing you mentioned, the interesting thing about, but just to riff off of what you're talking about, you know, Roald Dahl's one of those authors when you actually say out in a synopsis of the plots of his books, you're like, this guy's messed up. I mean, why am I allowing my kid to read this? I mean, they sound so bizarre when you read them out loud. Okay, there's this kid who's really, really poor, and he's so poor that his grandparents all live in one big bed. And okay, so there's poverty, and there's Veruca Salt, and there's Mike TV, and so he's making fun of America. And it's just like when you read out loud, it's like, boy, this sounds like a really unpleasant or unreadable book. But Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is fabulous. It's a fabulous. He had good illustrators. But still, it's a fabulous, fabulous book. And to a certain degree, the great thing about a great artist is that they can realign your reality. Like there's pre-Roald Dahl and there's after Roald Dahl. And Roald Dahl did something really interesting. He could, he made, did he allow Captain Underpants? Did he allow a series of unfortunate events? I don't know. Maybe we're making way too much more than it is, but I think children's literature is fascinating. We just had the guy on the show who did Bad Kitty. Right. Children's literature is so fascinating. Who said that? he said, "Oh, you can always find." I forget, it was Umberto Eco or who? No, it wasn't. It was somebody deeper who said, "You can always find the most horrible things a society has to say. It's what we put in our children's books."
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's that's post Roald Dahl. But anyway, it's worth 40 minutes watching the time. It touches on meditation. It touches on people making resurrections. It's about people redeeming their lives. It's about meditation. It's about stories within stories. And it's not as acutely painful as some of Wes Anderson's stuff has been recently. It's actually a lot of fun.
I'm on it. I mean, I think we've re-upped our Netflix during the COVID weeks here,
and it's 40 minutes, baby. It's a discount time, and it's an affordable time investment.
James, Lionel and I are always trying to grow our book list. Are you reading anything that you find interesting?
Yeah, I am. I mean.
I always get worried when you laugh.
How much time do you have? Yeah.
Okay.
This is longer now than any
Load the other tape reel.
Yeah.
Actually, the review of it will go up on the All Your Days newsletter tomorrow. But I just recently finished a really disturbing but fascinating book, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about here, Lionel. I just read for the first time in my life. This is not a new book. It came out in 1978. It's called The Cement Garden by Ian McEwan. And it's 138 pages in the way that novels used to be allowed to be before you had to like measure their weight in pounds. You're buying novels by the pound. It's in short, it's a book about a group of children that go feral after their parents die. It's highly, highly infused with incest and regression and burying a mother in concrete in the basement. It's not a normal read. It is deeply weird, as critics at the time referred to it. Ian McEwan writes these short, nasty, very English novels set on the very edges of English society. And yet it's exquisitely beautiful. And in all the ways that maybe Lolita worked, this works. And in all the ways that some of Angela Carter works, this works. And I was deeply troubled, and I felt like I was reading something dirty, which you don't often feel at the age of 49 anymore, where you're like, this is fucking sick. Like, what is going on? But I don't mean in the way of like Bret Easton Ellis and I don't mean in the way of Fight Club, not trying to beat you over the head with its brazenness, but rather it's infused with a kind of otherness, outre sort of human existence that to me just reawakened the senses as a reader. And so I have been reading something interesting recently, but then I was like, how do I even talk about this book? Right? First of all, it's not like it just came out. It came out in 1978 and everybody talked about it. Everybody wrote about this. Everybody fussed over it. Everybody accused it.
Aren't they amazing?
Yeah, and yet here we are. I mean, a book is like a time bomb, right? It just sits there and waits for you to like trigger it. And I read this. It had been sitting in my queue for a long, long time. I forget. Maybe I probably bought it in 2014 or 18 because there were some reissues of it that happened around then. So I probably bought it after reading a review in the New York Times Review of Books or the New York Review of Books, and it just sat there. And I've been trying to clean out my queue, and there it was, the next book in the queue, and I started reading this thing, and I was like, what the
Well, it's fascinating to mention that because we were talking, I think so many roads go through 1984. I think so many railroads go through the train station of 1984 by George Orwell. And it really kicked off one of those great British traditions. 1984, Lord of the Flies. Who's the guy who did Crash?
I know the story, but I don't know who wrote it.
No.
Right, but it's the British. I think it's actually Canadian. Strangely, I think he's a Canadian. I'm sorry. There's going to be, if we have any listeners other than James, they're going to be sending emails right now. But
I know that the film was directed. If you were talking about the same crash, it was directed by David Cronenberg, who's a Canadian director. If this is the story about people that have sexual relations by getting into car accidents,
yes,
J.G. Ballard.
J.G. Ballard, fabulous author, wrote a whole bunch of books. Same basic idea. Basically, Clockwork Orange, which is basically after Kubrick entered his Brit phase and was living in Britain. And like you said, Concrete Garden, and there's this whole, and then I had to say, it was a movie I had to stop, even though there's no sex and there's no gore. Children of Men.
Oh my God, that's very brutal. It's a very brutal film.
Yeah,
very brutal.
Take it. I was like a third of the way through, and I said, "That's it. I'm out. I'm sorry. I can't take this anymore."
I oddly I remember watching it back in 2006 or 2005 when it came out and thinking like, this is an extreme, presentation of a situation. And then just coincidentally, as much of this conversation has been, there was a clip of it somebody put up on social media that I ended up watching. And I was like, very few people have made. It was a scene in which the main character is running into a building that's being attacked and running up a staircase. It's sort of a long tracking shot. There's blood that's been splattered over the lens. And I thought, I don't think anybody's made a movie quite like this in the last 20 years. Like, there's something about this story that is just, it looks like Ukraine.
Deeply unhappy.
It just makes me, it just looked like somebody was looking forward in time and saying, what will the streets of Ukraine look like from 2006?
Yeah, it just drove me nuts. But it's that Brit thing. They have this thing. 1984, Lord of the Flies. They have this fascination with unbelievably grim futures.
There's a lot of Lord of the Flies running through the feeling of the cement garden. It's very much.
That's what I heard.
That was one of the most called out, reference for it is that, like, you're watching society within a very small structure break down. It's just that this one does it in such a way that it doesn't have that construct of us versus them. It's more of a construct of wallowing in your own domestic poison for 138 pages, and it's children who are doing it without parents because their parents have died and they don't want to be discovered because they're afraid of being broken up. So they bury the mother in a trunk in concrete in the basement and then create this very, very f***ed up version of a domestic situation amongst themselves.
Well,
I'm not sure it's for everybody.
Yeah,
that's
it's
that
totally
you asked
for this
what I've been reading.
podcast, though. Yeah, we should. That's one we should read, Lionel. Yeah, great.
138 pages. I mean, you don't even have to set aside that much time.
It's like Wes Anderson's latest one. It's not a big investment. Go ahead. The worst that happens is you're out 138 pages.
No, I'm out of my mind. Like this is one of those things. It's like the taste of Paxlovid. I'll never forget. I just had COVID a week ago, and I took the Paxlovid. And one of the interesting side effects of Paxlovid, which is kind of like nuking the virus from space, like it absolutely it leaves no doubts. You're taking care of this virus; it's going to be gone. But it makes your mouth. Someone wrote to me and had a very apt description. This is not my interpretation of it. I had a different. I thought the first time I noticed the taste of Paxlovid, which builds up in your system over the course of 4 days and just stays in your mouth, it actually becomes part of like the substance of your mouth feel for the time you're taking it. I thought, this is what it would be like to get like a blast of cremation ash into your mouth. But it's not really accurate. Someone else said it to me more. It's soapy grapefruit. It's like having the taste of soapy grapefruit in your mouth for 4 days, and you can't ever the only way you can get rid of it, the only way I was able to get rid of it was with Jolly Rancher candies, which I hadn't had since I was a child.
And gin. So is it an injection?
No, it's a 3 pill twice a day course that you take for 4 days. So like
I've never heard of this. What is this?
Oh yeah,
Paxlovid.
It shortens the symptoms of COVID.
I mean, completely eradicates them.
No,
is what they meant to say. Like within 8 hours, you are like I no longer feel sick at all. This can't be. I'm going to have gills growing on the arches of my feet within 2 years. Like, there's no way that this is a well tested like piece of pharmaceutical, but works like a charm.
Contains one or more of the following.
Designed during wartime.
Contraindications.
It does the trick.
Breathing.
Paxlovid, it does the trick. Like it, yeah. So, like, I just kept thinking of the scene from Aliens where they were like, "We just got to nuke it from orbit, man. Sure.
Let's go back to the mothership and nuke it from orbit." I love that.
That's
line.
pretty much how I felt about this drug. I was like, whatever this is doing, and in fact, it works so well that it kind of fucks you down the line. So, one of the things that happened to me this week is that it so completely suppresses the virus that your own immune system is sort of like, it's pool time, baby. I have nothing to do. And so what happens is when you stop taking the drug, you might still have some viral, material in you, and your immune system is like, wait, what? Like, I have to, what? Oh, no, wait, I have to do something? So you have
that shit over there.
So it's like a little bit of a rebound where, like, off and on for a couple of days afterwards, you might have a little tickle at the back of your nose. You might get a little bit of a fever or feel woozy. This is all uncharted territory, my friends. Like, we have entered into like they just gave them the Nobel Prize, and I'm all for the vaccines, but we are in way uncharted territory in terms of like turning around these injustices.
That's your new podcast title, Uncharted Territory with James O'Brien.
I'm a huge supporter. Get your vaccines. Take your Paxlovid if you feel sick, but also risk versus it's risk management. Like,
make sure your will is up to date.
Yeah.
Make sure you have a power of attorney.
Make sure you are nowhere near a phone operating at 950, what is it, 9,500 kilohertz, or you will be very dead very fast.
No. You're going to glow in the dark. You're going to be able to breathe underwater. But you won't have COVID.
It won't last. Yeah. Make sure you're not at the bottom of the East River when it wears off.
I'm just glad that I'm not procreating anytime after this. Like I've spared some child some sort of like spinal bifida like future.
Thanks to CRISPR in capsule form, we can now offer.
Yeah. We live in very, very liminal times, my friend.
Yeah, read Pump 6. It's only like about. It's only about 20 minutes of your time.
Hello, Bashkalupi. There is only one. There is only one.
But Pump 6, it'll take you half an hour to read the story, and it is it's not a great story, honestly. I don't think he's like the best writer in the world, but he has sort of that way of like Children of Men. It's just like you don't like it. You don't like it in any way whatsoever, but you can't forget it. Like it's just like, ugh. Amazing. Anyway, enough about that.
James, we have kept you an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's been a good conversation. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah. And now, can you suggest which song we should close with, or shall I pick one?
Since we've been talking about books and literature and things you can't forget, I'd go back to 2017 and check out Rabbit Run.
Rabbit Run,
which is on the album Careful in the Future. So it's named after the John Updike, novel.
The Updike thing,
yeah. And it happens to be one of Kara's favorites, so I always try to think about that. The way that Your Los Angeles is one of Kara's favorites, Rabbit Run is one of those for her. And I think that it captures the vibe that we've been kind of riding through here. A little pensive, a little scary, a little messy, a little weird, a little dark, a little spare. Those sorts of things are in there. So Rabbit Run is the one I'd think about.
Excellent. Here
and the other default is just grab All Your Days from the All Your Days album, because that's sort of like the baseline for everything that's happened since.
I'm going with your first thought.
All right.
Here is Rabbit Run.
Rabbit, run, nothing once did is ever undone. Whatever you slip through, whatever you stole, whomever you tricked and all the people you told. However you blistered all the months that you healed. The thoughts you were thinking, locks you thought you unsealed. Rabbit, run. Rabbit, run. Nothing once woven is ever unspun.
This has been another episode of Funny Not Funny with Lionel and Jim. You can find us wherever podcasts are found. We would appreciate it if you would leave us a rating or review and tell your friends about the podcast if you like it.